Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's your guy Realistic here, and I'm doing another tutorial for SoundOracle.net. And in this video, I'm going to go over some of my favorite and most useful tips that you should apply when using reference tracks. But before we get into that, if you're not already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page. That way you can stay up to date with our latest videos and tutorials. And also, Oracle and I have an online mixing course out called The Art of Beat Mixing, filled with hours worth of content, and even has PDF cheat sheets for you to follow along as well. So if you want to check that out, I'll put the link in the description below. But let's go ahead and dive into reference tracks and what they're used for and how to get the most out of them. So reference tracks are a really great way to get a better sounding mix, because you can constantly go back and listen to like a mainstream song and kind of listen to what they're doing, listen to where they have all the levels and the volumes of everything, kind of listen to their EQ styles, their reverb styles. It can really kind of help you get a better overall mix. So let's go into the best ways to get the most out of these reference tracks. The first one right here is using the right type of reference track, or using a reference track that matches the mood of your actual song. So like, let's say, I always use this as a reference, but let's say that you're working with a song that's more like Marvin's Room by Drake or Borrowed Love by Sway Lee and Metro Boomin, right? You wouldn't want to use a song like PETA by Roddy Ricch or Rockstar by The Baby. That wouldn't be a really good reference, because Marvin's Room and Borrowed Love, those type of songs are more filtered, they're more drenched in reverb, they're more kind of pushed in the back, they're more mellow. There's not really a ton of stuff going on. It's more about the vocal cutting through while everything else sits in the back. Whereas a song like PETA or Rockstar, I mean, it's got a really heavy 808 that's really cutting through. It's really distorted. There's a lot of excitement with the drums. The guitar is pushed really forward, or in PETA, the flute is pushed really forward. So that wouldn't be a really good reference. You want to use a reference that's going to match your song. So if you were going to work on a song that sounds like Borrowed Love, maybe Marvin's Room would be a better reference. Or if you're working on a song that sounds more like Rockstar, obviously you'd want to use a song like Rockstar or Vibes or PETA or whatever it may be, but something that fits the mood for it too. And with that also being said too, is you want to be able to also make sure that things kind of have a similar vibe within your session. Like, let's say for instance that you wanted to reference the song Jungle by Drake. That has a kick that just smacks. I mean, that thing really just cuts through the mix. But let's say that you're working on a song that has more of a kick that kind of sounds more like PETA, right? Where it's more trappy and punchy. It's not like a smack type of kick. Jungle by Drake wouldn't be a really good reference, and you're never going to get that kick to sound like that, because you'd have to do a few things in order to do that. The first thing you'd have to do is you'd have to change the sample entirely. You're not going to get that kick in PETA to sound like the kick in Jungle unless it has similar characteristics. Another thing too to consider is when we're working on a song like PETA, there's probably going to be more 808 and more sub-frequencies, whereas Jungle didn't really have a lot of that going on, so it allowed to have that type of kick that was really heavy and just really smack through. So you want to make sure that you're choosing the right elements with your actual reference track that will actually fit, and you want to be realistic about it. You know, you don't want to just like throw in some stuff that's just not going to work, and then suddenly you're wondering why this isn't working. Well, that's why. Okay, so now the next thing that we need to do is, once we actually import a track here, so I'm going to go ahead. I got a few right here of my favorites to choose from. I'm going to feel like this one right here is more of the style of this track right here. Unfortunately, I cannot play any of these for you because YouTube will take this down, because I don't own any of the copyrights to these songs. But anyways, after you've imported your track here, what you want to do is you actually want to turn the volume down of your actual reference track here. I usually find that I have to turn it down by about 14 or 15, but what you want to do is you want to turn it down to be the same volume as your mix. Usually when you're mixing and you don't have your limiter applied, you probably want to have it be around -6 dB of headroom, maybe max out at -3 if you really are the type to want to push it. But either way, you want to pull this down on your reference track, and you want to match it to the level of this what's in your session there. Usually I find I have to churn it down by -10 to -15. But the reason why you want to do that is because everything sounds better louder, right? And so if you import your reference track and it's super loud and your mix isn't super loud, you're going to constantly think that like everything is sounding much better in this reference track. No matter what you do, you're like, oh man, I keep, cranking up the low end on my kick to make it sound punchier. I thought that I had a lot of clarity in these vocals, but it's just not doing it. And it's really because your mind is tricking you because the reference track is too loud. So you just want to pull that down. Okay, my next tip right here is you want to make sure that your reference track is not going into your mix sum or wherever your bus processing is. So you see right here, I have a bus compressor, and then later on I'm gonna probably do some things with ozone and add a limiter on. Well, I don't want to run this through this chain right here because one, this right here has already been professionally mixed and mastered, so there's pretty good chance that there's already a ton of compression and a ton of limiting already going on. So what I'm gonna do right here is right now it is routed to the mix sum. I'm just gonna go ahead and take that out. So now whenever I reference this, it's not going to run through the mix sum, so I can just kind of hear it how it sounded originally there. Okay, my next tip then is to really pay attention to the volumes of what's in your reference track. A lot of times we may turn our kick up or our bass up a lot louder than a mainstream song that we're going to reference. And so what you want to do is you kind of want to go back and forth and really listen and pay attention, like where are the volume balances here? And then ask yourself, why that may be. How come on a famous song the kick drum isn't nearly as loud as I typically put it at? Well, the reason why it may be is because one, it may give more headroom so you can push the limiter up. A lot of times when we mix mainstream music, it's really, really loud, and part of being able to do that is because there's headroom and there's more room in the low end than we may think that allows it to get louder like that. Another thing to pay attention to is also, how bright and how punchy are they really making things. A lot of times we may tend to make our vocals a lot more brighter than what we actually hear in a reference track, which again is why a reference track can be so useful, because we may turn that kick drum up or we may brighten that vocal up just a little too much. And if we're using a reference track, we can actually go back and listen and be like, okay, you know what? That vocal's too bright, or that kick drum is way too loud, or maybe my 808 is there's just too much sub going on, and if I pull this down, I can actually have a little bit more room in the mix for other things that I can also turn the overall volume up. Okay, so now my last tip here for using the reference track is referencing by section. So instead of sitting there and listening to your reference track and then just having all this overwhelming flood of information, like, oh god, like I gotta make the kick punchy, and I gotta get the 808 to have a nice smooth low end, and I gotta turn up the clarity of the vocal, and I gotta make the hi-hat sizzle. Take it by section and reference by section. So what I usually do is, as I'm mixing the drums, I'll go back and I'll reference the track, and I'll just pay attention to the drums on the reference track. And then as far as how many times I'm referencing, I'll reference in the beginning so I can kind of get it in my ear, and then I'll mix it in the mix to kind of see where I want it to be at, and then I'll reference back after I've gotten it to where I want it to be at and see if I need to make any adjustments and see if it's fitting in the mix. And then if it is or isn't, I'll go back and make the necessary changes, and then I'll move on to the bass. And same thing, I'll listen to the reference track, I'll go in and do my interpretation of it, and then I'll listen to the reference track again and see how that all sounds and see if it fits or if I need to make adjustments. And then I'll move on to the instruments, and then I'll move on to the vocals, and the same thing, as I'll listen to what the reference track is doing, do my interpretation, and then go back to the actual reference track. And that's kind of how I do that, instead of trying to do it all at once, or trying to listen to the reference track too many times or not listening to the reference track enough. I feel like that's a pretty good balance. So again, we're going to use the reference track, do our interpretation of it, and then go back to the reference track and see if we need to make any adjustments. Now, the final thing that I just want to touch on with the actual reference tracks themselves to consider is you don't have to go in and make an exact copy of what the reference is. You know, you can still do your interpretations of things or your styles and your taste. The reference tracks are just there for a reference for you to be able to kind of, you know, compare and see where you could make adjustments and be like, okay, well, that's a good, you know, area for the volume here. That's a good amount of brightness for this style of song. Maybe I'm going to go ahead and apply those techniques and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind as well. But I hope that you got a lot out of this video right here, and hopefully this was useful. And also, like I said before, if you're not already, be sure to subscribe so you can see more videos like this. And also, if you did find this video helpful, if you could hit that like button, believe it or not, it really does help to go a long way to grow this channel. Hey, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel right here so you can catch the latest tutorials on mixing, mastering, and production. And you can check out some of our suggested videos here, here, and here. And of course, if you're looking for premium loops and samples, you can find that at SoundOracle.net. We got plenty to choose from.